On the night of June 21st, 1582, Akechi Mitsuhide stood over the burning ruins of Honnoji Temple and held all of Japan's hands. 13 days later, those hands were empty. He had the perfect plan. He had the perfect moment. What he didn't have was a single ally. What went on? He killed Oda Nobunaga. He had 13 days to turn one night's coup into a lasting empire. He never made it out of the second week. Akechi Mitsuhide was not an impulsive man. In the summer of 1582, he was in his mid-50s, cultured, methodical, one of Oda Nobunaga's most senior and trusted commanders. He had served under the Demon King for more than a decade, campaigning across central Japan, composing classical poetry, navigating the elaborate social hierarchies that defined power in the Sengoku era. If you had met him before Honnoji, you would have seen a man who had spent his life building things carefully. The coup, when he finally executed it, was flawless. What followed was not. 6 days before the attack, Mitsuhide attended a Renga poetry gathering at Atago Shrine near Kyoto. His verse that evening has been debated for 4 centuries. Toki wa ima, ame ga shita shiru, satsuki kana. Now is the time. All beneath heaven shall know my rule. 5th month. The word Toki hid a second meaning. The Toki clan, Mitsuhide's claimed ancestors. And the phrase Ame ga shita shiru meant to govern all under heaven. He may have announced his rebellion in verse, in front of an audience that never suspected a thing. Nobody in the room understood. On the night of June 20th, Mitsuhide told his assembled officers where they were going. His orders had been to march west to reinforce Hashiba Hideyoshi's campaign in Chugoku. He didn't. Instead, he turned his army of roughly 13,000 soldiers toward Kyoto. His declaration to his commanders has passed into legend. The enemy is at Honnoji. It was a few words that changed Japan forever. The troops marching through the darkness toward the capital didn't yet know exactly what they were doing. But Mitsuhide knew. He had been building toward this for a long time. Nobunaga was at Honnoji with a handful of attendants, no significant guard. He was traveling through Kyoto en route to join the Western campaign and had stopped for a night of rest. When Mitsuhide's forces surrounded the temple in the pre-dawn dark, and the attack began, Nobunaga reportedly grabbed a spear himself. The temple burned. His heir, Nobutada, was hunted down at Nijo Castle and killed the same morning. By dawn, Oda Nobunaga, the man who had dominated Japan for 2 decades, was dead. The most powerful warlord in the country had been erased in a single night. Mitsuhide moved quickly. He occupied Kyoto, secured the imperial court, and issued orders as if he were already the master of Japan. He held the capital, the emperor, and the symbolic legitimacy that control of Kyoto implied. What he didn't have were allies. The political landscape of Sengoku Japan was built on personal loyalty, debt, and threat. and Mitsuhide's position in that landscape had always been defined by Nobunaga. Without Nobunaga's authority behind him, he was a general without followers, only soldiers under command. He needed powerful lords to recognize him. He sent messengers immediately. The replies he received were devastating. Hosokawa Fujitaka, longtime ally, patron of the arts, his daughter's father-in-law, shaved his head and adopted Buddhist mourning dress for Nobunaga rather than join the rebellion. His son, Hosokawa Tadaoki, placed his wife, Tama, Mitsuhide's own daughter, under house arrest rather than answer his father-in-law's summons. The Yamato warlord, Tsutsui Junkei, declared neutrality and watched from a safe distance. Other lords simply didn't respond. The silence across Japan was complete. Mitsuhide had planned the coup for years. He had not fully planned what came next. 200 kilometers to the west, Hashiba Hideyoshi was in the middle of one of the era's most methodical siege operations. He had flooded Takamatsu Castle by damming a local river, trapping the garrison with no hope of relief. Then, a fast courier arrived from Kyoto. Hideyoshi read the message. Within hours, he had negotiated a ceasefire with the Mori clan. Shimizu Muneharu, the castle commander, performed ritual suicide to seal the arrangement. Hideyoshi ensured news of Nobunaga's death was suppressed long enough to protect his retreat. Then, he began to march. What followed is known in Japanese history as the Chugoku Gaeshi, the return from Chugoku. Hideyoshi moved his force of more than 20,000 soldiers back toward Kyoto at a pace that defied belief. Recruiting additional troops from sympathetic lords along the route and spreading word that he was marching to avenge Nobunaga's murder, his army swelled and accelerated simultaneously. He covered roughly 200 kilometers in approximately 10 days, a forced march that military historians still find extraordinary. By the time Mitsuhide learned the full scope of what was coming for him, it was almost too late to prepare. The Battle of Yamazaki was fought on the 13th day of the 6th month of the old calendar, July 2nd by modern reckoning, at a narrow corridor between Mount Tenozan and the Yodo River south of Kyoto. The geography left little room for maneuver. Hideyoshi commanded roughly 40,000 troops. Mitsuhide had perhaps 16,000. At the crucial moment, Tsutsui Junkei, who had declared neutrality, crossed to Hideyoshi's side. The battle lasted only a few hours. Mitsuhide's forces broke, and the rout was complete. 13 days of calculation, of nerve, of waiting. Over in an afternoon. Mitsuhide fled east, trying to reach Sakamoto Castle, his home domain on the shores of Lake Biwa. He never arrived. Near the village of Ogursu in Fushimi, his small party was ambushed. According to the traditional account, he was killed by peasants armed with bamboo spears, farmers who may or may not have known who he was, attacking a group of armed men who had wandered into their territory. There are other accounts: a ronin, a bandit, an opportunistic kill. The precise circumstances of his death remain disputed. What is not disputed is how quickly it happened. His head was carried to Hideyoshi's camp
for identification. Akechi Mitsuhide, the man who had spent decades commanding armies, composing classical verse, navigating the courts of warlords and emperors, was confirmed and displayed. The speed of his fall was almost disorienting. Less than 2 weeks had passed between Honnoji and Ogursu. He had achieved the single most audacious act in Sengoku history. And then, with no political allies, no military reserves, and no path forward, he had simply evaporated. The 13-day reign entered the Japanese historical consciousness almost immediately.
Hideyoshi's political moves after Yamazaki were swift and calculated. He framed himself as Nobunaga's legitimate avenger and heir, a position that gave him enormous authority in the weeks that followed. At the Kiyosu Conference, convened just 2 weeks after the battle, he outmaneuvered his rivals within the Oda hierarchy to secure control of Nobunaga's infant grandson as his protege. The conference, meant to determine the future of the Oda clan, became instead the moment Toyotomi Hideyoshi began his own ascent to undivided power. Mitsuhide's coup had destroyed the old order. Hideyoshi made himself the new one.
Why did Mitsuhide fail? The first answer is political. His entire identity as a commander had been shaped by his relationship to Nobunaga. He held territory, commanded troops, and wielded influence because Nobunaga had given him those things. When he killed Nobunaga, he didn't inherit that authority. He destroyed the source of it. Other warlords had spent years building independent bonds of loyalty and obligation across Japan. Mitsuhide had spent those same years serving Nobunaga too completely. He was not a man with a network. He was a subordinate who had eliminated his superior and then discovered he had nothing left. The second failure was military, but it's more complicated than it appears. No commander in Japan could have anticipated the Chugoku Gaeshi. Hideyoshi's speed was genuinely without precedent. Mitsuhide had planned for political resistance and prepared to consolidate control of Kyoto over weeks. He had not planned for an army of 40,000 materializing at his doorstep in 10 days. Historians have also noted that Mitsuhide made no serious effort to intercept Hideyoshi or disrupt his march. He waited at Yamazaki rather than advancing. Whether that reflected poor intelligence, strategic paralysis, or something else entirely, we don't fully know. There is still one question that haunts the story of the 13 days. The Renga poem at Atago Shrine. If Mitsuhide really did encode his intentions in those 31 syllables, 6 days before the attack, what does that tell us about his state of mind? A man who announces his rebellion in a poem, in public, before he has committed to it, is either supremely confident or caught between impulses he cannot fully reconcile. Some historians read the poem as the act of a man performing his own courage, convincing himself through the art form he loved best that he could do what he was about to do. What did Mitsuhide want? This question has occupied historians for more than 4 centuries.
Some argue he sought revenge for humiliations too public to forgive. Others see a rational political gamble, an attempt to seize a moment of unusual weakness. Still others believe he acted on behalf of forces we've never fully identified: the imperial court, rival clans, or interests working behind the scenes. The 13 days give us no clear answer. A man who planned this carefully and executed it so precisely almost certainly had a vision of what came next. We simply don't know what it was.
The Japanese phrase, Ju Sannichi Tenka, the 13-day rule, has passed into the language as an idiom for any brilliantly executed initiative that collapses before it can take root. Mitsuhide is remembered in Japan almost entirely through this lens of spectacular failure. Unlike Nobunaga, Hideyoshi, or Ieyasu, he left no institution, no policy, no transformation. He destroyed the old order and then disappeared before anything new could form. The man who killed Oda Nobunaga became a footnote in the story of the man who succeeded him. History, in the end, is written by the people who show up on day 14.
Mitsuhide's story ends before he could explain himself. The next story begins with a man who had already won everything a warrior could win, and then, very deliberately, stopped. Miyamoto Musashi fought 61 duels without a single defeat. In his later years, he put down his swords and walked into a cave. He emerged with a manuscript, a set of paintings, and a philosophy of living that has outlasted every general of the Sengoku era. We've covered Musashi's duels and his writing before. This time, we ask what none of those episodes fully answered. Why did the most feared swordsman in Japan decide to become an artist?
That's the story of Akechi Mitsuhide and Japan's most famous 13 days. If you want to understand why the Sengoku era produced men capable of acts this extraordinary and this catastrophically flawed, this channel covers the full sweep of it. Subscribe to stay with us, and we'll see you in the next episode.